In the depths of medieval Europe, the fear of sin was stronger than mercy, and a woman's body became both battlefield and confession. Before science, before compassion, there were rituals. Cruel, sacred, and terrifying rituals. To prove innocence or uncover secret life within the womb, women were subjected to trials born from superstition, sanctioned by faith and enforced by the powerful. Milk turned to judgment, metal to prophecy, ashes to divine wrath. Each test claimed to reveal truth, yet revealed only mankind's obsession with control and purity. These are not myths. These are the documented horrors of an age that confused cruelty with faith. In the year 1347, within the mist-laden hills of Lothringen, stood the estate of Baroness Isolde von Brayden, a widow both revered and feared. Her manor, a fortress of cold marble and quiet whispers, had become a sanctuary for the women of the region, or so it was said. In truth, it was a place of judgment. Each month, the church midwives arrived with parchment, incense, and a small bowl of fresh goat's milk. The ritual was simple, the belief ancient. A woman's urine mixed with milk would reveal her sin. If the blend curdled, she was carrying a child conceived outside holy blessing. To the peasants, it was divine truth. To the midwives, a ceremony of control. And to Isolde, a spectacle that masked her own torment. Rumor had long followed her that the Baroness carried a secret of her own. Her husband, Lord Brayden, had died years prior under strange circumstances. The villagers whispered of poison, of jealousy, of a curse that haunted her womb. No child had ever cried within those stone halls. No heir had been born. Yet Isolde carried an obsession that bordered on madness. She collected women accused of secret pregnancies, forcing them through the ritual not for justice, but fascination. She watched the milk curdle with quiet satisfaction, as if each clot confirmed her belief that all women were deceitful, all wombs impure. That winter, a servant girl named Marta was brought before her. Barefoot, trembling, she denied the accusation, her belly flat, her eyes wide with fear. The midwives prepared the test, whispering Latin prayers that no one understood. Isolde leaned forward, her gloved hand clutching a rosary of bone. The girl's urine was poured into the bowl. The milk clouded, then thickened, separating into pale chunks that floated like spoiled honey. Gasps filled the chamber. The priest declared the verdict, guilty. The girl fainted. But as the midwives removed the bowl, one of them noticed something strange. The milk in every vessel curdled that morning, even before a single woman had been tested. The air was heavy with sourness, the scent of rot. It was as if the ritual itself had soured under unseen eyes. That night, while the manor slept, Isolde entered the chamber alone. She dipped her own finger into the milk, trembling as it clotted around her skin. She whispered to the darkness, "If guilt is measured by curdle, then I am guilty of more than they will ever know." No witness heard her confession. No priest wrote it down. But the legend began that the Baroness herself had been with child once, and that she had ended it before birth. The milk, they said, curdled at her very presence ever since. From that night onward, no test in Brayden Manor was ever pure again. The ritual continued, but the milk always thickened, not from the women's sin, but from the unseen rot that dwelled within the soul of its creator. And so began the first of 10 trials, a cycle of superstition that would spread across kingdoms, carried by those who believed they were testing purity, when in truth, they were only tasting corruption. Far from the grand halls of Lothringen, beyond forests blackened by frost and fear, lay the forgotten village of Varenberg. Its cottages leaned against one another like weary bones, their thatched roofs sagging under decades of superstition. Here, the church's reach was not through soldiers or swords, but through ritual. And of all their trials, none was more feared than the test of the wheat. It was said that in ancient Egypt, women had once urinated upon grains to divine fertility, a custom reborn in medieval Europe and sanctified by priests who saw in every sprout a sign of God's will. 2 small piles were laid upon cloth, wheat for a boy, barley for a girl. The woman's urine would decide which took root first. Yet in Varenberg, the ritual had twisted into punishment. If neither grain grew, she was branded barren, cursed, or worse, accused of consorting with demons. The winter of 1350 came with hunger and plague. The villagers prayed for signs of hope, but instead they found a scapegoat, Elena, a peasant girl barely 16, whose betrothed had vanished after the last harvest. Her mother swore the girl was innocent. The priest, Father Ulrich, saw opportunity. To restore order, he would make of her a lesson. Under the gaze of the villagers, Elena was led into the chapel cellar where the ritual table waited. A candle guttered in the damp air. 2 handfuls of wheat and barley rested upon the linen, their pale husks trembling in the draught. She was made to relieve herself into a clay bowl, a humiliation disguised as holiness. The grains were soaked, the priest whispered Latin invocations, and the cellar door was sealed. The villagers would return in 3 days to see which seed had spoken. What Elena did not know was that Father Ulrich had already salted the soil beneath the table. No grain could sprout there. To the villagers, this ensured God's true verdict. To Ulrich, it ensured fear. 3 nights passed. The air grew thick with mildew and silence. When the door was unbarred, the grains lay lifeless, slick with rot. The priest raised the cloth for all to see. No sprout, no blessing, no hope. "She is barren," he declared. "The Lord has closed her womb for her sins." Elena fell to her knees, pleading through tears, but the crowd's pity had frozen into superstition. Stones struck her before the priest raised his hand. They dragged her to the edge of the forest and left her among the frost and wolves, her cries fading with the wind. Days later, a traveler passing through Varenberg saw something strange by the chapel wall. From a crack in the frozen earth, 2 thin stalks of barley had begun to rise, pale and trembling in the cold. The salted soil had failed to stop them. The priest ordered them torn up and burned, declaring them a sign of witchcraft. But by spring, villagers whispered that wherever Elena had fallen, wild wheat grew tall and golden. The church called it blasphemy. The villagers called it mercy. Yet none dared repeat the test without fear of ghosts. Still, the ritual traveled, carried by word of mouth, reshaped by those who believed the grain could speak divine truth. Across valleys and kingdoms, women would kneel over seeds, praying that nature itself would spare them. But the soil had already been corrupted, not by sin, but by the hands that salted it. And so, the curse of Varenberg spread, proof that when faith is weaponized, even the earth forgets how to grow. By the mid-14th century, whispers of strange truth tests had reached the noble courts. Faith had taken a new form, one that hid cruelty beneath the guise of medicine. Among the wealthiest families, a ritual was spreading. Known simply as the Iron Key, it began in the province of Thuringia, in the manor of Lady Sibylla von Erhard, a woman whose beauty had once been sung by poets, but whose mind was a labyrinth of fear. Her husband, Lord Erhard, had returned from the Crusades hollow-eyed and suspicious. Years of separation had birthed doubt, and doubt was poison in noble bloodlines. When Sibylla failed to conceive, the servants whispered. When she fainted one morning, they whispered louder. The church physician arrived with a remedy, or rather, a test of divine truth. He held up a small iron key, its surface dark with rust. "Tie it with ribbon," he said, "and place it within the mouth of the sleeping woman. If God marks her tongue by dawn, she carries life within. If not, the womb remains as cold as iron." The words carried the weight of faith. Sibylla protested, but silence was demanded. That night, the key was washed in holy water and laid upon her tongue. A ribbon of white silk hung from her lips like the thread of a spider. Candles burned through the night as the household waited. By morning, she awoke choking. The key had slipped deep into her throat. Blood spotted her pillow. Her tongue bore a dark imprint, shaped like the cross engraved upon the metal. Lord Erhard stared at the wound as though it were scripture. "God has spoken," he murmured. The priest smiled thinly. "A child stirs within." But no life came. Weeks passed, and Sibylla's body grew weaker. Her mouth bled with every word. The priest insisted the pain was proof of divine quickening. Her ladies-in-waiting whispered of fever, of madness, of nights when she pressed the key to her heart, as if seeking to unlock it. Then, one morning, a maid found her collapsed beside the hearth, the iron key clutched in her hand. Her lips were blue. The physician declared it punishment for disbelief. Lord Erhard, desperate for an heir, ordered another test, this time upon one of the maids. The ritual continued. Each time, the key was placed upon another trembling tongue. Some bled, some fainted, some never awoke. The priest wrote that the key of heaven opens only the pure womb. None dared question him. When at last the manor fell into silence, the iron key was found resting in a bowl beside the altar, its edges worn smooth. Beneath it, a note in Sibylla's hand read, "If faith demands my voice, then let it keep it. I have unlocked nothing but pain." The manor stood abandoned by spring. Travelers said the chapel bells rang by themselves on cold nights, and that a woman's voice whispered prayers in a tongue too torn to understand. The test of the iron key spread quietly through noble courts, a symbol of sanctified suffering. It was said to reveal both conception and corruption, though in truth, it revealed only fear disguised as faith. And as the years passed, the iron key became more than an object. It became a warning that even the purest metal, when pressed against the human soul, could as word of the iron key faded into rumor. Its echoes traveled quietly, reshaped, misunderstood, reborn in simpler tongues. What began as noble superstition trickled down to the starving countryside, where faith and fear were one and the same. And in those hollow fields of Europe, another trial took form, one that would measure sin not with metal or milk, but with the hunger of a bird. The story begins in the famine years of 1353, in a convent on the outskirts of Kaltenbruck, a settlement so poor that even the rats had fled. The convent, dedicated to St. Agatha, stood like a cracked tooth above the valley, home to a handful of nuns and one frail abbess who believed that starvation purified the soul. When rumors spread that one of the sisters, Agnes, carried a child, the abbess saw a chance to prove divine justice. The local priest, a man named Father Theobald, arrived with a black rooster clutched beneath his arm, its feathers dull with neglect. The ritual, he claimed, came from the ancients. The bird of light will reveal darkness, for it pecks only at the feet of the impure. Agnes was brought into the refectory at dawn. Her hands trembled as she crossed herself. The other sisters formed a circle, chanting low hymns. The rooster, starved for 3 days, was set loose upon the cold stone floor. For a moment, it wandered aimlessly, claws scraping echoes into the silence. Then, drawn by instinct more than omen, it lunged and pecked, once, twice, at Anne's bare feet. A gasp spread through the hall like fire. The abbess cried, "The creature sees what we cannot." Father Theobald nodded solemnly. The Lord speaks through beasts when women lie. No one dared defend her. Agnes fell to her knees, weeping. She swore innocence, but hunger had dulled compassion in the others. The abbess, shaking, declared that the child she carried was the devil's seed. By nightfall, Agnes was taken to the cloister's crypt, her prayers swallowed by the sound of the rooster's restless claws above. When dawn returned, the convent bell tolled, though no hand pulled its rope. The sisters found Agnes lifeless, her face serene, a scrap of feather clenched between her fingers. The priest proclaimed it divine proof, the unholy expelled from the pure. Yet something changed in the days that followed. The black rooster refused to eat, circling the chapel steps, crowing at invisible shadows. The abbess ordered it slaughtered, but when they cut its throat, no blood spilled, only clear water, as if the creature itself had turned hollow. The sisters whispered that the bird's hunger had been fed by sin, not flesh. Some claimed to see Agnes's shadow kneeling by the altar at night, her feet still marked with the rooster's pecks. Others fled the convent altogether, unable to bear the sound of feathers against stone. By the year's end, St. Agatha's convent was abandoned, its chapel overtaken by weeds. The peasants who passed its ruins would not speak of it, but they carried the tale elsewhere. In villages and hamlets, the test of the rooster became a crude echo of divine judgment, a superstition that justified cruelty in the name of purity. And thus, from the blood of nobility to the dust of peasantry, faith continued to twist itself into torment. Each test became a darker mirror of the last, reflecting mankind's desperate need to see sin, even where none existed. By the time the test of the rooster had become a whisper on the tongues of pilgrims and peasants, superstition had reached the courts once more, reshaped by silk and candlelight. In the gilded halls of Queen Ermina of Holstein, cruelty no longer hid behind religion alone. It wore the mask of curiosity. The queen, barely 23, ruled beside a husband twice her age. Her beauty was fabled, her vanity legendary. The plague had not yet touched her court, yet fear of contagion and infertility haunted her days. Whispers of miscarriages among the noble women reached her ears, and soon, suspicion festered like a sickness of the mind. When one of her ladies-in-waiting fainted during Mass, Ermina demanded an answer, not from physicians, but from the mirror. An alchemist from Prague, gaunt and soft-spoken, presented her with a new method. "The eye," he said, "is the window of the womb. Place a mirror beneath her gaze, light a flame beside it. If her pupils flicker like the fire, she bears life within." The queen smiled. The ritual was elegant, clean, unbloody, suitable for noble hands. That night, she ordered her women to gather in the Hall of Reflections, a vast chamber lined with Venetian glass and 1,000 candles. Each woman knelt, a mirror poised beneath her eyes, the flame of a single candle quivering before her. The queen watched in silence. For some, the pupils remained steady. For others, they trembled, reflecting the light like tears. The alchemist recorded their names, murmuring that the womb does not lie. When it came to Lady Brianna, the queen's favorite companion, the flame danced wildly. Her reflection shimmered like a spirit caught between worlds. "She carries life," whispered the alchemist. The queen's smile faltered. Jealousy, sharp and immediate, struck her like heat. Within hours, Brianna was confined to her chambers, accused of conceiving by sin. Days later, Brianna was found dead, her mirror shattered beside her, her candle burned to ash. The alchemist called it divine confirmation. Ermina called it justice. Yet at night, when the queen returned to her chamber, she found her own reflection disturbed. The flame by her bedside trembled though no wind stirred. Her pupils flickered like water in a storm. Each morning, her servants found new cracks spreading across the mirrors, thin as veins yet unmistakable. The queen forbade the mention of it, but dread consumed her. She summoned the alchemist again. "What does it mean," she asked, "when the mirror trembles for one who is blameless?" He hesitated. "Then perhaps," he said softly, "it is not a child that stirs within, but something else that seeks birth." By spring, the queen's laughter had turned to murmurs. She wandered her mirrored hall alone, whispering to her reflection as though it might answer. When a servant entered one morning, the chamber was filled with smoke. The mirrors had melted, the candles burned down to pools of glass. The queen lay among them, eyes open, pupils still flickering in death. No one spoke her name again. But across the courts of Europe, Nobles began to mimic her ritual, the mirror and the flame, convinced it could reveal the secret life of the womb. They called it enlightenment. History would remember it as madness. And in the broken reflection of Queen Ermina's eyes, superstition saw its own face, beautiful, fearful, and utterly blind. By the early 14th century, belief had become both science and sentence. In the shadowed monasteries of Burgundy, monks whispered of divine signs that could separate purity from sin, conception from corruption. Among them, one ritual gained grim prominence, the wine test, known to peasants as the poisoned chalice. Its origin was said to lie with Brother Alaric, a physician monk whose devotion bordered on mania. His journals, inked in trembling Latin, spoke of the holy vessel of life, a cup that could draw truth from deceit. He claimed that the essence of a woman's condition could be revealed by a single sip. If she carried life, the wine would sour upon her tongue. If barren or deceitful, it would remain sweet. But in the hands of fearful men, faith curdled into cruelty. When the Duchess of Vallon was accused of concealing an illegitimate child, her husband summoned Alaric's disciples. The court gathered at dawn, the scent of incense and spilled wine heavy in the air. Before her stood the chalice, silver, rimmed with thorns of engraved ivy. The Duchess trembled, her silk gown whispering against the cold marble floor. "Drink," ordered the Duke, "and let God judge what man cannot." She lifted the cup. The hall fell silent. For a moment, nothing stirred, until she gasped, choking, the wine spilling crimson down her gown. Her body convulsed. The taste had turned bitter as blood. The monks nodded solemnly. "The womb bears life," one murmured. But the Duke's face hardened. "Not mine," he whispered. Within the hour, the Duchess was dead, her throat blackened, her lips stained with the residue of what the monks later called sanctified mercury. They claimed the bitterness was divine proof. In truth, it was poison, slipped into the wine to quicken revelation. Soon, the ritual spread beyond the walls of Vallon. In taverns, in manor houses, even in convents, women were made to drink, each sip a silent confession. Some believed it brought divine justice. Others knew it for what it was, slow execution dressed as faith. Brother Alaric, now old and half-blind, watched his sacrament twist into massacre. In his final entry, he wrote, "I sought truth within the chalice. Instead, I poured death into the mouths of the innocent." When his body was found in the cloister garden, the chalice rested beside him, filled with stagnant wine. His tongue was black. But death did not end the ritual. The Church, unwilling to denounce what had once served its purpose, allowed it to fade quietly into rumor. The peasants, ever hungry for miracles, continued it in secret. Mothers forced their daughters to sip from copper cups, praying that sweetness would spare them shame. Centuries later, a chronicler in Dijon would find a line scrawled in a forgotten manuscript. "The womb of Eve was judged by wine, and the cup has never emptied." No one knew who wrote it. But somewhere, in the cellars of an abandoned abbey, they say the chalice still sits, its silver tarnished, its rim etched with lips that never faded. And when the wind passes through the hollow nave, it carries the faintest scent of wine and something far more ancient, the fear of creation itself. The fire that consumed the Duchess of Vallon's throat did not end with her. Across Christendom, new forms of divine proof emerged, each more cruel than the last. In an age when faith sought to measure sin through suffering, the line between miracle and murder had already vanished. High upon the cliffs of Montrevel, overlooking the storm-bitten sea, stood the Abbey of St. Aurelius, a fortress of stone and silence. It was here that the Benedictine midwives tended to women accused of impurity. They called their trial the Candle of Ashes. Its making was sacred, they claimed. Bones of long-dead saints were burned and ground to fine dust, mixed with wax drawn from the altar's bees. The candle, once molded, was said to hold the virtue of heaven. When lit before a kneeling woman, it would reveal the truth of her womb. If the flame burned steady, she was pure. If it flickered, even for a breath, she carried sin within. In the winter of 1327, Sister Beatrice of Artois, a novice barely 20, was chosen to oversee the ritual for the first time. Her patient was a peasant girl named Lena, brought by her parish priest under suspicion of conceiving through blasphemy. The child's father, of course, was never named. As the storm howled beyond the chapel's narrow windows, Beatrice prepared the sacred candle. Her hands trembled as she pressed the cold ashes into the wax. Beside her, the abbess whispered, "Remember, the flame does not lie." Lena knelt, pale and shaking. The candle was lit. For a moment, the flame glowed pure and still. Then, as thunder rolled over the sea, it flickered once, barely visible. The abbess gasped. "She carries sin." Lena wept, begging for mercy. Beatrice hesitated. She knew the wind had caused it. She had felt the draft from the broken window. But doubt was heresy. "Repeat the test," she pleaded softly. The abbess agreed, though her eyes darkened with suspicion. Another candle was lit, this one made from the ashes of St. Aurelius himself, relic of their founding father. Beatrice whispered the prayer of purity, her voice breaking. The flame sputtered, then burst into sudden brilliance, too bright, too fierce. The wax cracked, spilling molten fire across the altar cloth. The abbess screamed as the flame spread, devouring the silk, the crucifix, the scrolls of scripture. The wind howled through shattered glass, feeding the inferno. Beatrice tried to smother it with her veil, but the fire climbed her habit, consuming her sleeves. Lena fled, her cries lost in the roar. Within minutes, the chapel was ablaze, a tower of judgment burning against the Black Sea. By dawn, the abbey was ash. Only Beatrice's body was found, her hand still clutching the charred remains of the candle. The bishop who came to bless the ruins declared it divine punishment for false faith. But the sisters who survived told another story, that as the fire rose, they saw Beatrice standing in the midst of it, untouched, whispering, "The flame does lie. It always has." For generations after, villagers avoided Montrevel. Yet on stormy nights, travelers claimed to see a single light burning upon the cliffs, a candle that never melted, its flame unwavering against the wind. The church called it a miracle. The people called it a warning. The ruins of Montrevel were still whispered about when a new kind of trial began, spreading across the noble courts of the empire. Where once fire had judged women, now it was iron, cold, unfeeling, and merciless. In the dim corridors of Lord Ewald von Hohenstein's castle, the cries of the accused echoed beneath vaulted ceilings. The lord was a widower of severe piety, known for his obsession with purity and sin. His late wife, barren and frail, had died under the weight of his suspicion. Now Ewald turned his devotions toward invention, a way to separate truth from deceit through the logic of metals. He called it the silver needle test. According to his court physician, a drop of a woman's urine, when in contact with silver overnight, would reveal divine secrets. If the needle rusted, it meant the womb stirred with life. If it remained clean, she was innocent or cursed. It was said to be a test of both purity and providence. But soon, purity became persecution. One by one, the women of the castle, servants, maids, even visiting wives were summoned to offer their proof. They wept into brass bowls while monks recited Latin hymns, watching as the physician lowered a needle into each. The bowls were sealed and placed in the dungeons until dawn. By morning, the verdicts came. Those whose needles bore stains of red or rust were condemned as adulteresses or witches. Their hair was shorn, their hands bound, and their sins purified through torment. Among the imprisoned was Alara, a seamstress taken from the village below. Her crime, refusing to name the father of her unborn child. She had hoped to protect him, a soldier long dead in war, but silence was guilt in Lord Yule's hall. When her turn came, the needle glimmered faintly in the torchlight. The physician murmured a prayer and lowered it into her urine. "If it turns dark," he said, "you have been chosen by sin." That night, the guards whispered that Yule himself descended into the dungeon. He carried a candle and the silver needle in hand, testing it again and again as if seeking to prove the divine with his own cruelty. By morning, the physician declared the needle deeply corroded. Ilara was sentenced. The ritual of purification began before noon. Her wrists were cut, not to kill, but to bleed her slowly, her blood used to cleanse the needle for the next woman. The irony was as cruel as it was deliberate. But Ilara was indeed with child. As her strength faded, she felt movement within her, faint, fragile life stirring one last time. She pressed her hand against her belly and whispered to the unborn, "Forgive them. You were innocent." When the guard came hours later, she was still. The needle lay beside her, untouched by rust. It was said Lord Yule kept it as a relic, proof that God had blessed his methods. Yet within a year, his castle was abandoned. Servants spoke of nights filled with the sound of whispering women, of silver needles glinting in the dark, falling like rain from the rafters. In the centuries that followed, the silver needle test appeared in records of midwives and physicians alike, each claiming it as science, though none dared ask where it began. And in the ruins of Hohenstein, buried beneath ivy and stone, a rusted needle remains lodged in the wall, blackened not by truth, but by the sins of the man who forged it. The ruins of Hohenstein faded into legend, but the hunger for truth through torment endured. When faith could no longer find answers in iron or ash, it turned instead to air itself, the unseen breath of guilt. In the glittering yet hollow court of Bohemia, under the rule of King Vaclav II, superstition was draped in velvet and gold. The nobility spoke of enlightenment, yet behind brocade curtains, their chambers reeked of incense, wax, and fear. It was there that the trial of the burning feather began, a ritual born from vanity and vengeance. The test was said to reveal not the child, but the truth of the womb. A white feather, plucked from a swan and anointed in sacred oils, was burned before the accused woman. The smoke, they claimed, carried the judgment of the angels. If the woman inhaled without coughing, she was pure. If she coughed or turned away, she was guilty, for her body rejected the breath of heaven. The ritual was conceived by Father Marek, a confessor to the royal household, a man who mistook cruelty for piety. He introduced the test to expose a scandal within the court, whispers that one of the king's mistresses carried a child of illegitimate blood. Her name was Mira of Ledez, barely 19, known for her grace and silence. The queen despised her, and the king adored her too openly. When her body began to change, the queen demanded a test befitting a sinner. On a cold morning, before a gathering of nobles, Father Marek set the stage. Mira stood barefoot upon the marble floor, her gown clinging to trembling shoulders. A single feather lay upon a golden plate. The priest ignited it. The air filled with sweet smoke, laced with oils and incense. Mira tried not to breathe, but the chamber was small, the air thick. She coughed once, softly. A murmur rippled through the hall. "She rejects purity," the queen whispered. Marek smiled thinly. "Then the heavens have spoken." That night, Mira was taken to the crypts below the cathedral. She was not tortured, not yet, merely purified. The feather's ashes were mixed with holy water and poured upon her lips. She choked again, this time on the irony. By morning, she was dead. The cause, they said, was suffocation, the proof of divine will. But sin, like smoke, does not vanish. It lingers. Within weeks, the king's other mistresses began to fall ill. The feathers used for each ritual had been soaked in mercury oil, a poison disguised as holiness. Father Marek knew this. He called it the cleansing agent of souls. When the king discovered the truth, he ordered Marik's execution, burned, fittingly, by his own ritual. The priest's robes caught fire first. As the flames rose, his final scream was a prayer. The king never remarried. In his last years, courtiers claimed that during evening mass, a single white feather would drift from the rafters above the altar, landing upon the chalice as if descending from heaven. But it always turned black before it touched the wine. The people called it justice. The chroniclers called it madness. And thus the test of the burning feather, born in deceit, ended in fire, joined the long chain of truths forged by ignorance and sanctified by power. When the fires of Bohemia dimmed, Europe fell into a silence heavy with ghosts. The age of superstition had refined itself into a weapon, sharpened by faith, wielded by power. And among its cruelest architects stood one woman, whose name had once commanded both fear and reverence, Lady Isolde of Varenberg. It was she who, decades earlier, had devised the first of the pregnancy proofs, the curdling of milk that condemned a generation of women. Her methods, born of obsession and pride, had spread like contagion across kingdoms. But now, time had turned against her. The same church that once praised her divine discernment now called her impure. Whispers crept through her manor's corridors that she had conceived a child outside holy sanction, that she had betrayed her late husband's bloodline. Whether it was truth or revenge mattered little. The Inquisition had found its newest trial. They arrived at dusk, hooded men, their torches staining the stone with red. The chamber prepared for her trial was cold and bare, lit by a single candle whose flame seemed too still, as if afraid. At the center stood a basin of water, a vial of salt, and a blade blessed by the church. The lead inquisitor spoke with calm authority. "You once judged others, my lady. Now God shall judge you." Isolde did not beg. Her pride, even then, was carved from the same stone as her cruelty. She extended her hand without trembling. The blade cut deep across her palm, her blood spilling into the basin below. It clouded the water, swirling like smoke in the pale light. "If it darkens," said the inquisitor, "it is proof the child's soul stirs within you, proof of your sin." The salt was poured. The blood turned darker, almost black, as if recoiling from the world itself. A murmur rippled through the priests. They crossed themselves, whispering prayers. But Isolde's eyes remained fixed on the basin. The reflection staring back was not her own. It was the face of the peasant girl Lena, the nun Agnes, the seamstress Alara, the queen's mistress Mira. Every woman who had suffered under the ritual she birthed seemed to surface within the blood. Her breath faltered. The candle flickered once, then steadied. "Do you repent?" the inquisitor demanded. She did not answer. Instead, she dipped her wounded hand into the basin, lifting the dark water to her lips. "I repent," she whispered, "for believing that God ever spoke through cruelty." The priests recoiled. The lead inquisitor shouted for restraint, but it was too late. Her eyes rolled back as the blood she had spilled began to stain the floor, spreading like a living shadow. The candle sputtered. Then, in one brief blinding instant, the flame extinguished. When the light returned, Lady Isolde lay motionless. The basin was shattered, its contents seeping through the cracks of the stone floor. None spoke. None dared move. Outside, the bells of Varenberg tolled for the first time in years, not for victory nor birth, but for judgment. The inquisitor closed his book, sealing her name among the condemned. But as he turned to leave, he noticed the trail of blood still glistening along the altar. It had formed a single unmistakable shape, a circle enclosing the cross, the same mark that had been carved upon every woman she once accused. And in that silent chamber, beneath the dying echo of the bells, the cycle of cruelty finally met its end, not through mercy, but through the blood of the one who began it.